good? Yep. Perfect. All right. All right. Here comes some stragglers. Give them a time to. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. No, I'm gonna actually be doing this the whole time. It's yes, it is my quote unquote my music. Just having a hard time with my mouth. This is like me, my parents, when they had me to come downstairs to unpause the VCR back in 1987. Now I'm that guy. Oh, I don't. But how, now, okay, so how come I'm not seeing my presentation up there? Sorry, okay. Yep. From the beginning. Boom. Perfect. All right, well, we'll get started. Thanks for coming tonight, you people that have nothing better to do on a Saturday night. Kind of what it comes down to, isn't it? Let's be honest. Oh, yes, thank you. He gets the door prize. I don't care what raffle gets drawn. Oh, yeah, well, Dan took a day off, so. All right, my pointer works. All right. Yes, well, let's get going. My name is Emmanuel Parenteau, and tonight I'm going to actually apologize on the front end because who here's seen the movie The Matrix? You know, when they plug his head into the computer and they download a lifetime of Kung Fu into 10 seconds, and it hurts. So he's like, like that. Tonight's going to be like that, so I apologize. You guys will be like semi-PhD biologists by the time you're done, so. All right, so ever since the Old Testament times and the Greco-Roman record of medicine, we've realized that if you hang around sick people, you tend to get sick. So the infectiousness of disease was something we've known for a long time. Now, we even at one point thought, in the 1500s, somebody started saying, well, you know when you look at bugs, sometimes there's like bugs on the bug, like mites. What if there's even smaller bugs that we just can't see? And people were like, oh, that's crazy. Well, then Leeuwenhoek's microscope from 1676 was the first microscope powerful enough to see microorganisms. So it turned out the bug theory, as goofy as it sounded, was correct. Edward Jenner, an English physician, he noticed that milk maidens did not get smallpox. And they would regularly pop the cowpox blisters on their cows to maintain the cow's health. And he thought, well, what if there's something in that blister that's good for smallpox? Because they're not getting smallpox, even when the epidemics runs through town. So he lanced the cow blisters and then took the liquid of it and scratched it into the skin of his patients. And long and behold, we had our first official vaccine. Actually, the Chinese had something similar in the 1000 AD. They beat us by almost 7 centuries, but we don't have too much record of what they were doing. Up until that point, literally, the theory of bad air for disease was the mainstream theory. So, and it started with Hippocrates in the Greek times. And you ever heard the name Galen, the physician Galen, the Roman physician? He died in 200 and something AD. But his medical theories, which were based off the Greeks, lived on until basically the 1700s. The people who told, the bug theory guys were told, hey, no, Galen, that's the guy. And he says it's bad air. So that's why plague doctors would have potpourri in their masks to try and clean the air. Here's Galen and his books. Again, they were the Bible of medicine for a very long time. Another theory of disease was the spontaneous creation of disease. And Reddy did an experiment where he said, I'll put a piece of meat in 3 jars. One of them's completely sealed. One of them is the air can get in, but not bugs. And let's see what happens. And that laid to rest the idea that disease just spontaneously generates. This guy, this Italian fellow, he found that fungus was killing silkworms in France. And he killed the fungus, and then the silkworm industry took off and running. And of course, Louis Pasteur, he took cerebrospinal fluid from rabbits that had rabies, heated it up to kill whatever was making it bad, and then injected it into kids, and long and behold, the first actual attenuated vaccine. And this is in the time where we knew what was going on. We knew about the microbiological world. So he heated viruses to either kill or weaken them enough for them to be safe. And then, of course, we have the same process done to milk, and it's called pasteurized milk. We still do it to this day. So we are now living in the era where we understand where the small bugs, we call it the microbial world, and we divvy it up into living and non-living. Now, the living microbial world is things like bacteria. So when you have pneumonia, the Black Death was Yersinia pestis, a bacterial infestation on rats and ticks. And leprosy is also, it's Hansen's disease, or Mycobacterium leprae is the name of it. But leprosy is a bacterial infection. If you have fungal infection, yeast infection, athlete's foot, ringworm, I've had ringworm my whole life as a wrestler, that's a fungal infection. And of course, parasites like malaria and toxoplasmosis. Here's a bacteria. It's considered living because it can get food, move away from danger, reproduce. It behaves like a living. It has the 5 points of biological life. So do fungi, and this is mold. And see how it shoots spores to reproduce? That's why you have to be careful when you're cleaning mold, right? Because you don't breathe. It'll grow into your lungs if you're not careful. And the parasites, I think the most evil part of the pathogen world, they're basically small worms and bugs. Matter of fact, here's an actual picture of the face of a tapeworm. So you want that inside of you, running around, eating stuff out of you, stealing your food? The non-living world is basically viruses. There's DNA viruses and RNA viruses. The DNA viruses look like the moon lander on the right-hand side there, or left-hand side. And then the coronavirus is like the ball-shaped one over there, and that is the RNA viruses. And basically the spaghetti inside of them is RNA. It's genetic information that can be used to build the whole virus. And that is what is going on. Now what's interesting here is, here's the entire animal kingdom represented in blocks. Now you can't necessarily, do you guys see the little cubes there? Looks like a chocolate bar, right? Each cube represents 1 million metric tons of carbon. And that shows you how much mass of each part of the animal kingdom there is. We're just third from the bottom here. We're not even a full layer. We're about 60 billion carbon tons. That's how many humans there are. Now, look at us put into the rest of the kingdoms. Here's the whole animal kingdom, of which we're just 1/2 of the third bottom layer. Plant mass, bacterial mass, fungi, viruses, and parasites. We are grossly outmatched. So why aren't we dead? How come we're still alive? Well, because of this thing. The immune system, of which there's an innate and an adaptive one. The innate one is essentially your skin. There's enzymes in the oils in your skin and in your tears that break down stuff as well, but actual physical barriers, the mucous membranes in your mouth and your bum are connected, right? So that's an entry point that virus pathogens can get in. Bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses. They have protective layer, and the stomach acid acts also as a protection. Think of your innate system basically like a military compound. The walls, the doors, the gates, the windows, the roof, it just keeps things out. It's not intelligent. It's just a barrier. Your adaptive immune system is like a group of intelligently trained soldiers. So for example, you got the B cell, you got the 2 T cells, 2 types of T cells. You got the phagocyte and you've got the macrophage. They are mainly active. Now they can think and learn and grow. That's why they're called adaptive. They're mainly active in your lymphatic system. You know when you get sick and you get bubbled up lymph nodes? It's because there's a lot of action in your lymphatic system. You're fighting off infection. You're producing a lot of antibodies and B cells and T cells, plasma memory cells. It itself, the lymphatic system, is like a cobweb wrapped around your venous system, and you can osmotically go from the blood to the lymph to back and forth. But most of the action of immunity happens in your lymphatic system. Now, a B cell is surrounded on its surface with receptors, and anything that can trigger these receptors is called an antigen. You guys have heard of the rapid antigen test that you get for COVID? It looks for the presence of the COVID antigen in your bloodstream. And all pathogens seem to have something that can trigger the B cell. Once the B cell is triggered, it either turns into a memory cell or a plasma cell. Plasma cells are just photocopy machines that pump out antibodies. Those little Y-shaped guys are antibodies. That's what you use to fight off disease. And they are specified to that antigen. The memory cell simply remembers how to do this, but doesn't do it yet, so it can do it later. Depending on the disease, these memory cells can last months or decades, several decades, which would be essentially a lifetime. Now, let's take a close-up look at those little Y-shaped guys right here. They look like that, and they plug right into an antigen like Lego. Here's a picture of a bunch of antibodies attacking a coronavirus. So if you plug up the surface of a virus, it can't do anything. You've neutralized it. That's how B cells work. Macrophages basically go around killing everything. Now, they were the airplane in my analogy, right? The jet fighter, because jet fighters can go around doing whatever they want. But you know in those movies, when the guys on the ground radio in a bombing, they go, hey, I bombed this coordinate. Well, macrophages can hear from helper T cells, which we'll see just in a second, to get more specific about what they kill. T cells, here's what happens. A virus gets into your body. The phagocyte, which was the tank, eats it up. And then it plucks off the antigens and puts it on itself, like this, all over its body. Then the T cell, helper T cell, comes and learns from that antibody and then signals both the B cell and the killer T cell, and they go to work. Now, HIV primarily suppresses helper T cell activity. That's how important it is. It almost doesn't touch these other white blood cells. HIV hurts your helper T cells enough, you can't fight off a common cold and you die. That's how important the T cell is. T cells can form memory cells for disease that go into your bone marrow and other parts of your body for storage that can be there for decades, okay? There is blood work. You can't get it done in Canada, but we'll talk about it later. There's blood work that goes to show you if you've got either antibodies, B cell memory cells, or T cell memory cells. Right now, the rapid antibody test is just looking for fresh, free-floating antibodies in your system. 85% of us, after 6 weeks post-infection, even if we've overcome and developed an immunity to COVID, 85% of us will lose our blood-borne antibodies. They just go into the memory hole. But we're still immune. We just don't have it free-floating. Vaccines is another thing that helps fight disease by triggering our immune system, not by itself, right? These are the lists we talked about: the smallpox, the rabies vaccine from Pasteur. In 1930, we invented something called the electron microscope, which allowed us to get even more data from the microbial world, and we exploded the manufacturing of vaccines. Who here has heard of Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine, right? What did he do that was different from Pasteur? Pasteur invented or at least popularized the idea of heating to weaken a virus. This guy actually killed the polio virus, specifically, making it even safer than an attenuated virus. So there's no chance of infection. And the trials from 1952 to 1955 went forward, and unfortunately 10 kids died and 200 kids got polio. But it turned out the reason is Salk refused to patent his he said it'd be like patenting sunshine or air. He refused to make money off his vaccine. And so therefore, a whole bunch of companies jumped on the market and decided, I'll just make money off of this. One of them cut corners and didn't properly follow his instructions and were not killing the polio virus. That's what happened. But even then, that was enough. The Surgeon General would not okay the polio virus for another 10 years, basically. And none of this was ever done by force. Within 20 years, by free choice, the same instinct that makes people look both ways when they cross the street, it overwhelmed the free market and essentially flatlined polio in the United States. This is from the CDC. On to COVID. You guys following me? Is this too much? Is this just right? There's a lot of you guys, I should have handed out candy bars for brain food. This is probably the most famous disease in history. I don't think anybody does not know the word COVID-19. Here's how it works. It comes into contact with one of your cells. The spike protein attaches to what's called an ACE receptor, triggering the cell wall, whatever cell it is, to absorb the fuse itself with the capsule around the COVID vaccine, virus. Then the spaghetti here gets puked into your cell, and the ribosome goes to work. It takes the RNA and it turns it into active protein, rebuilding another copy of the coronavirus. Each infected cell is estimated to produce about 700 new COVID cells. So you can see what kind of J-curve you would hit in terms of saturating your body with them as soon as you get infected. So it's called SARS-CoV-2 officially. SARS means severe acute respiratory syndrome. And that's because if you're really struggling with COVID, that'll be where you'll feel it. You'll feel like you can't breathe. It causes an inflammatory reaction. The mucus production in your lungs goes way up, starts to clog your breathing, and then it's very easy to develop a secondary infection like pneumonia. COVID stands for COVID, and 2 is because it's the second such SARS-CoV. The first one was in 2013. How does one get COVID? It is a droplet or aerosol infection. So when I'm just breathing normally, I produce huge, why is it that every time you go up to a mirror and you go, oh, it gets moist? Because your breath is always wet, right? When you breathe, cough, talk, water droplets are coming out. Now they're tiny. These big ones are about 100 micrometers big. A micrometer is a millionth of a meter or 1,000th of a millimeter. Very, very small. You can't see it, even the big ones. If I cough or sneeze, it gets broken up into even smaller particles and it goes further. So it's a droplet aerosol infection, and it goes from the mucosa of someone's mouth to the mucosa of someone else's mouth. As far as we know, that's the primary mechanism of infection. Now, masks. This one over here, the pores in this mask are 0.3 micrometers. That means the large and medium-sized droplets can't exit or enter. Only some of the smallest ones. It also has electrostatic qualities to its fiber, so it actually attracts droplets as well. So it doesn't just have to block them like a goalie, it can suck them in and attract them. The N95 mask, so that's the only thing that can get through that one. The N95 mask has an average pore size of 20 micrometers. That means the small and medium ones can get through, but it also has a triple layer and it has electrostatic elements to it. It's somewhat effective. The one on the left is pretty much guaranteed to work. This one works second best, and then the most common one is the surgical mask that you see everybody wearing. And it has pores about the same size as N95, but it has very little electrostatic capacity. It blocks the medium, so it'll block sneezes and coughs, basically. It'll block medium and small can get through. Everything I put down here is what can get through. So far, this is the only thing that can't get through for sure, these two. And then the cloth mask, my favorite, has an average pore size of 80 to 500 micrometers. It's like putting up a chain link fence to keep your neighbor's mosquitoes out of your yard, basically. And it's homemade stuff. And the thing with the surgical mask, so it lets everything through. The surgical mask, have you seen people always playing with it? They cough. It isn't foolproof. People reuse the same mask. It's meant to be taken off and thrown in the garbage every single use, but that's not what happens, right? Then you get your hand bacteria gets in there, your mouth bacteria gets. If you go to the public restroom with a surgical mask, you know what coliform bacteria is? It's the poo bacteria. It's airborne. It's all over. They did that. I saw a show one time where they tested household people's toothbrushes for their own poo bacteria, loaded with it, right? So unless you saran wrap and seal your toothbrush or brush your teeth in the kitchen, you're brushing teeth with your bum to some degree. So the coliform bacteria sucks to very, very well. So if you go into a public restroom, have your restroom mask ready to go. I don't know. Figure it out. All right. Who knows what an R0 rating is? Okay. That's the infectability of a disease. So influenza has a 1 to 2 R0 rating. That means if I get the flu, I'm going to infect, on average, 1 to 2 other people. So 1.5. Polio was 4 to 6. Chickenpox is 10 to 12. The original Wuhan strain of COVID had a 2.5 rating. Delta doubled that to 5, and Omicron doubled that to 10. And that's fairly typical for coronavirus family viruses. They get more infectious as the new generations come, but they also get less deadly. That has always been the case. I think it's true of influenza as well. Now, question is, how deadly is it? We know how you can get it. We know how easily you can pass it on. What's the actual deadliness of the vaccine? And everything I'm using tonight is official, either CDC, Health Canada, nothing's from a conspiracy website. I want to know the actual numbers. This infection fatality ratio by the US CDC was last done in March of last year. They were doing it every 6 months up until March of last year. They just stopped doing it. Now, whatever number is true of what was going on in the heat of the Delta wave and the Alpha wave will be even less true of Omicron. Omicron is proving it to be much more mild than Delta. So this number will be higher, I suspect, than what Omicron numbers would come out if they came out. So they put it into age groups. This is how many people would die out of 1 million cases in the US. And for the 0 to 17-year-old crowd, you had a death chance of 0.002% if you get COVID. Now, just so you know, for that age group, the flu is twice as deadly as that, okay? This is the group that has the least risk from COVID, according to the CDC statistics. My age group, 18 to 49, has about the same rate of death from this as the flu, 0.05%. So if I get COVID in my age, on average, if you factor in my health status and everything else, it probably is even better than this, but on average for this age group, it's 0.05% fatality rate if you get COVID. 50 to 64 is 0.6, that's 10 times worse than the flu. And then 65 plus, it becomes 9%. Now that's mainly driven by the 80 plus thing, but they just lump that all into 65. So there are people, and look, the other thing too is I know somebody who has got my age group, my health status, got COVID. We thought he was going to be dead. He spent 3 months in the hospital. He was on a respirator. He was in and out of an induced coma. We were saying our goodbyes. He pulled through, but theoretically, he shouldn't have. It's a Russian roulette sometimes what COVID does to you. Some people who shouldn't suffer from it almost die or die from it. It does happen, okay? It is just simply highly improbable. CDC also said this. Can you guys see? That's too small for you guys. 6% of the deaths, of the total deaths in the US, were COVID alone. 94% had an average, for the rest of them, there was an average of 2.9 other morbidities involved. That does not mean that COVID did not kill them. It just leaves the door open to the notion of, would that person have died of COVID had they had one less morbidity than they did, or two, or no morbidity, right? We don't know, but it opens the door to that. After a Freedom of Information went through, the Bonnie Henry was kind enough last month to let us know that they've been counting in BC people with COVID in the hospital and not necessarily there for COVID. So I go in there for a broken leg, I test positive, I'm listed in the hospitalization for COVID. She said that herself. So you can look at our numbers and almost slice them in half. This is the stats in Canada by age group. This says 80 plus years old. That's 61% of our death from COVID in Canada. If I stretch the marker out to include 70 years old and above, I'm up to 82% of our death. And if I add the 60 to 80 plus, it's 93% of our deaths. Okay, so that is the landscape. This is all from Health Canada's, this is Statista, but it's based off Health Canada. Another thing, just came out 3 weeks ago. In order to streamline the reporting process, Bonnie Henry says BC is going to start counting deaths with COVID as deaths of COVID. So the numbers are about to get a little beefier than they have been. They're on a downwards trend, but we're about to see, and she explained why. Why did she tell us that? Why are they doing that? I have no idea, but that's what's going on. What are the mRNA vaccines? I'm surprised at how many people, people in this room will probably have a higher education quotient on this. If you're here, you're skeptical, most likely. But I've talked to people that don't question anything. They just, CBC says it, Bonnie Henry says it, Teresa Tam says it, that's enough for them. I'll ask them, what do they know about the mRNA? I actually had a 10-minute argument with an ER doctor when I was in the ER a few months ago, because he asked me, why aren't you vaxxed? He wouldn't let it go. He wouldn't let me go. I'm like, so I started discussing with him, and I was stunned at how little he knew about the COVID vaccines and COVID itself. Just because they're doctors doesn't mean I'm not saying they're not intelligent or well educated, but it doesn't mean they know about this specific issue. It is its own issue. What is an mRNA vaccine? Well, here's the entire body plan of a COVID virus, right? So this is all the RNA. There's 30,000 letters in the RNA of COVID. And it codes for the entire, it's the body plan for the entire virus. The COVID mRNA vaccine only has the chunk of RNA that builds a spike protein. This is a spike protein. This is why they call it the coronavirus. By the way, you see that puffy appearance? It looks like those old medieval era king's hats. You just add a band on it like a crown. Anyways. So, this is all you get built by the mRNA vaccine. And how it does it, they've been trying to do that since the 70s. But they didn't know how you could put RNA into a body without the body destroying it. But how do you get the RNA safely delivered into a cell? And they didn't know, that's my wife's hair, they didn't know how to do it. In 1991, they finally patented the technique of what's called a lipid nanoparticle. It's a little bubble of fat. They put the RNA in there, and it gets absorbed by your cell walls, and then it pukes out its RNA, but it's not for the whole virus. It's just for the spike protein. And you think about it this way, by the way. If I infected someone with COVID just by talking to them, which can happen, how much fluid is getting into their mouth from mine? We're talking like a vapor, a wisp of a vapor. How many of that vapor contains coronavirus? I don't know. So you get that into someone's body, you will get a certain amount of spike proteins created by the creation of the virus itself. When you look at a vial for a vaccine for COVID, the vial contains, I don't remember how many cc's, but it's a heck of a lot. Unless I go like this and spit directly into your mouth, I will not be delivering that much fluid into you. And the only thing, I don't know what the concentration of that fluid is, pure RNA to build a spike protein, but it's a high, high number. So the amount of spike protein RNA put into you and therefore delivered, the amount of spike protein generated by a vaccine in terms of your body replicating it is something, I think they're saying it's close to 1,000 times more spike proteins will go into your body than if you just get a natural infection, right? That's something to keep in mind for later in the presentation. All right. About 65% of planet Earth has received a COVID vaccine. Okay, that's a huge, that's about and if you look at the actual statistical map, the dark green is those who've received 2 shots, and the light green is those who've only received 1 shot. So the overwhelming majority of that 65% is double vaxxed. Okay, that's about 4.9 billion people on planet Earth. It's estimated by Worldometer that there's been, and the WHO backs this up, there's been less than 500 million infections of COVID. That's 10 times less COVID than there are vaccinated people, right? Now, did the vaccines work? This data is from the U.S.'s CDC from October 2021 to February 22. Now, the unvaxxed, who are about 33% of the population, formed 70% of the hospitalizations. It was even worse in the death spectrum because the unvaxxed were 81% of deaths. So if you've never gotten COVID and you get COVID and you're not vaxxed, you were more likely to die or go to the hospital. That is a statistical fact in the US. Now, if you're not vaccinated but you got COVID, that's a different story, right? But we don't know who's who by these statistics. Now, if you look at the time graph of that time period, as the Omicron variant becomes more dominant, you're seeing the unvaxxed come down towards the same status as the vaxxed. Now, that was the US data. The UK came out with different data. Now, the Lancet, which is a very high, well-respected peer-reviewed journal on science, they put out a thing in January saying transmissibility of SARS-CoV among fully vaccinated individuals, and it concluded that there's a growing evidence that peak viral titers, that's the amount of virus you can find when you swab the back of the throat of a person, whether you're vaxxed or not, they were about the same. So, and this was random large-scale testing, which means whether or not you're vaccinated doesn't seem to prevent you from getting or spreading it. it seems to prevent you from having a bad outcome if you have no immunity towards it. I've had both Delta and Omicron, so at this point, my viral titer would be about the same as a vax person, but my personal outcome with COVID in the future is going to be about the same as it was the last 2 times I had it, which is basically, it was like a stiff cold, right? But your ability to carry the virus does not seem to be improved by the vaccination, which makes sense because the vaccine's active in your bloodstream and in lymphatics, not in your mucous membranes, right? Lancet also said, stigmatizing the unvaccinated is not justified, and they were commenting after there was a huge outbreak in Massachusetts, in which Massachusetts was about 60% vaxxed, but they represented 74% of the cases, right? So they're still able to get it. Doesn't seem to affect your ability to not get it. In February of 2022, 2 months ago, the UK put out their latest update on vaccine efficacy. And what they found, which I thought was fascinating, is they said when they did blood work, remember blood work determines if you've got T cell immunity hiding around in your body and B memory cells, not just your antibody levels. 98% of English adults have have some form of immunity to COVID. And 18.7, so let's say 19% of them were not vaxxed. So that means the actual vaccination rate in the UK is about 79%, right? Now, they looked at the deaths from COVID, deaths within 30 days of your diagnosis. Unvaxxed, fully vaxxed, and partially vaxxed formed 89% of the deaths. And this is up until the end of last year, which means that they're 79% are vaxxed, but they make up 89%. And if those who died within 2 months of getting COVID, it was 90% of the vaxxed. So they in the UK are overrepresented. It didn't seem to help them in the UK. What does that mean? I don't know. I'm just presenting the statistics, right? Now, are they safe? We talked about how effective they are. I believe that if you've never been exposed to COVID and you get a bunch of spike proteins that are true of COVID put into your body, you're going to have immunity. I'm not surprised that it helped people have immunity to get the vaccine, right? It should not be a surprise. Now, is it purely a plus or is there a downside? Do you know the only 2 things on earth that every single last one of us can safely ingest? Air and water. Some people will die if they eat a celery stick, okay? There is nothing on earth that is purely safe for everybody. So let's look at, do you guys know what VAERS is? Yes, exactly. You stole my thunder. There you go. In the States, I can directly make a claim to VAERS. I can get online or fax it in, and I can get them to actually count a vaccine adverse event, right? My doctor can do it too in the States. Now, what's interesting is on the VAERS website, I don't see any breakdown. They'll give you a table of how many adverse events have been with the MMR vaccine, the flu shot, chickenpox vaccine, polio vaccine. It's all listed, but not the COVID. I had to dig very deep in the CDC data to find those numbers. They don't put them out front. And the only vaccine on the CDC's website that has its own introductory page is the COVID vaccine, and it makes sure to tell us they're safe and effective without giving us any numbers. The other vaccines, they just give us the data right off the bat. Kind of strange. Now, what's interesting too is check this out. Remember last year when the University of Guelph virologist, Dr. Byron Bridle, said that he found that young male adolescents had a high propensity for myocarditis from the vaccine. How was he treated by the media? Not great, right? But if you go on the CDC's website now, the first thing you'll see is especially male adolescents have a risk of myocarditis from the vaccine. That's now. Now the CDC is agreeing with it, and I'll show you in a couple of minutes. So does our Canadian Health website. This is from April 2021. CTV ran a news article saying essentially no evidence, none, zero, zip, no evidence that there's myocarditis risk. None, zero, forget about it. Another interesting graph that's from the US data. This is the number of deaths within the number of days after vaccination. Now again, Maybe these people died of another cause. I'm not going to fudge my data the way some people do, but it's a curious phenomenon. How, if it's just regular demographics, why would there be a spike in deaths within a few days after a vaccination? There's other explanations, there's confounding variables, but it's a curious phenomenon. This is even more stunning. This is, for these drugs, this is the number of adverse events from 1996, and this is from the FDA and CDC. From 1996 to 2021, these are the total numbers, and this is from June of last year, by the way, of adverse events from all these drugs. That's 25 years worth of adverse events. In June of last year, that was 6 months into the COVID vaccination program, okay? Now granted, only flu, about 50% of the population gets the flu vaccine every year, right? About 60%, 66% of the US is vaccinated. So there's still more COVID vaccines, but this is still 50% of, that's 140 million people for 25 years gives us this number. 6 months of 66% gives us this number of adverse events, right? You got to know that stuff. They know that stuff. It's on their website. It's not out front. You got to dig, but it's on their website. How accurate is VAERS? Just because it's counted on VAERS, does that mean that's the total number? That's like God's having his brain downloaded onto VAERS and we know the exact number? Well, the Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute did a study in 2009, the largest scale study on how accurate VAERS is ever done. 715,000 people were tracked, and that represented about 1.4 million inoculations. And they studied the EPIC medical record system. The Mayo Clinic uses EPIC. It's the biggest medical records system in the US. So what you do is anytime, if I'm in a healthcare provider that uses EPIC, I can go get to the pharmacy, it's recorded in the system. Everything I do is recorded in the system. So what they discovered, then they used this study, the Harvard Pilgrim Institute, and they produced what's called the Lazarus Report. And on it, they produced their findings. And what they said was, 0.3% of all adverse events are reported. That means any adverse events, itchy skin, headache, and somewhere between 1 to 13% of serious events were recorded. Okay, so that's the Lazarus Report. In a couple slides, I'll be using this number to do an estimate for the Canadian version. I'm going to use right down the middle, I'll use 7%. Is that okay with you guys? This is just a thought experiment. This is just my hypothesis. They also said, they were willing to create an automated response system that would bypass the physician because physicians are often too busy. Often the correlation between an injury and a vaccine is not clear. It's a slow, inaccurate system, right? The waters are muddied. But they said that essentially the CDC ghosted them. They're like, they wouldn't return our phone calls. When we were going to do it for them, they said, no thanks. All right, we have the CAFIS in Canada. We don't have VAERS. We have the Canadian Adverse Events Following Immunization Surveillance System. Bet you didn't know that, did you? Okay, good. That's our version. Now, in the States, if I get a vaccine injury, I can call up, I can dial it in the computer, I can fax, I can do it directly from me to the system. Do you think it's like that in Canada? Heck no, it's Canada after all. 3, there's you. 1, 2, 3 layers of bureaucracy before it can even have a chance of entering CAFIS. So what do you think the chances that it's more sensitive as a reporting system than VAERS? What do you think? I would say it's probably much less. There's too much bureaucracy between me and the system. Now that may root out some false positives, but it's also going to hamper the true natural organic flow of information. So, now, Canada also says, by the way, that the myocarditis risk is especially high in younger people. So what was laughed at last year is now on our government's website. So keep that in mind. Now in Canada, about 85% of us have received at least one dosage, almost 86%. It's about 32 million people. So there's been 32 million people who've come into contact with the COVID vaccine. Okay? On the website, it lists this is the serious adverse reactions list. This number is too small for you guys to see, but it's 6,490. So I'm going to say that if CAFIS lists 6490, I'll use the Lazarus reports average and say 7% is really getting on there. That means there's 14.3 times more potentially than what's being reported, which gives us a potential number, I think is a very conservative estimate of 92,807. That means, put into numbers of 32 million inoculations, that 0.3% or 1 out of every 133 Canadians will have a serious, that includes strokes, liver failure, heart issues. This is the serious category. Now, if you just take stuff that affects the lungs, like blood clots, stroke, heart attacks, cardiac arrest, whatever, myocarditis, if you just take that category from the serious category, that's 55% of them, right? Which means that you have a 0.17% chance of a serious lung, heart, or brain adverse reaction. Okay? Based off, don't forget, it's based off of this, not the actual number on their website. I'm using this to show what I think is more, and I think that's probably a lowball estimate. So that's 1 out of 588 people will have a serious lung, brain, or heart reaction. Now remember that the polio vaccine trials included 623,000 children from 52 to 55. They ended up with 10 deaths and 200 polio infections. That means the fatality rate for that trial was 0.0018%. Yet the Surgeon General would not okay that, would not license that vaccine because of that. And it was a 0.03 serious adverse reaction. Those are the facts. Do with it what you will. Now, there is, and you can go to Wikipedia, literally, and Google or Wikipedia search FIFA. Do you guys know what FIFA is? The Federation of International Footballers, whatever. It's the professional soccer body for the whole world. They have an average, it's right there on Wikipedia, they have an average of 4.2 deaths per year. And most of them are cardiac arrest. So you could be a fully healthy young athlete, and if you push yourself hard enough, a certain percentage of people will die because they have underlying conditions that nobody knows about. They have limits to their body. You do die as a healthy athlete. Now, every year from 2001 to 2020, there were little bumps in the statistic, but it was all averaging around 4.2%. Very steady for 20 years. What do you think the number was for 2021? This is all on Wikipedia, and this is admitted to by FIFA. 21 guys died. That's a factor of 5 higher than normal in 1 year. A complete spike, just like that. I can't tell you why, but they're all except 2 were cardiac arrest right there on the field. That phenomenon is happening. If you start paying attention, you start to hear news of more and more people getting things like brain strokes and cardiac arrest. It is more common, and FIFA has an actual statistic. I couldn't find it for the NFL. I couldn't find it for the NBA, for whatever reason. I only have so much time, by the way. So there you go. It was a factor of 5 increase. Now here's a somewhat dramatic but montage of clips from the news.
A Baker County High School senior is in the hospital after collapsing on the tennis courts.
Breaking new details on the deaths of a high school soccer player.
Finland, Denmark star man Christian Eriksen collapsing towards the end of the first half.
The Kennedy High community mourning tonight after one of their high school football players died.
A South Carolina high school football player has died after collapsing at football practice.
Star college basketball player collapsing on the court. We want to warn you, the video may be difficult to watch.
Florida Gators star Keontae Johnson collapsing during the game.
A West Catholic high school student has died after collapsing during a football scrimmage.
On mile 8, she suddenly felt fuzzy and blacked out.
17-year-old Ryan Jacobs' heart stopped.
Unexpectedly collapsed on the field.
Megan went into cardiac arrest.
Collapsing during Friday night's football game.
reason for his collapse is unknown.
The reason why Manny collapsed in the first place still isn't known.
So you might be wondering how someone in such great shape could suffer cardiac arrest.
It's a rare thing that happens.
The coroner says the condition is rare.
It's just one of those tragedies.
Did she have any signs before this race?
Absolutely not. She felt like she was in the best shape of her life.
That's incredible.
USC wants to attack, but you've got to be careful. He collapsed. He collapsed.
We have a player down.
Something happened to one of the referees.
We've had a heartbreaking situation here.
And what's interesting too is if it was proven that these were COVID-only myocarditis, do you think we'd hear about that if that was a trend? That'd be splashed all over the news, right? FIFA is the only one that's really put out the numbers. That's a 500% increase in cardiac issues in 1 year after a flatline 20 years. Again, I'm just giving you the statistics. Now, what about the relationship between Big Pharma and our government? Is it clean? Is it pure? Is it holy? Is it accountable, filled with accountability and transparency? Right? I'm not answering questions tonight. I'm asking questions. All right, well, that's your opinion. Do you guys know that New South Wales is the largest economy within Australia? Their premier a few months ago quit. I saw her press conference when she quit. Most people don't know about it. She quit because she was part of an ethics probe into the relationship between herself, her colleagues, and Pfizer lobbyists. There was tens of millions of dollars exchanging hands, okay? That's a money trail, okay? Big Pharma in the US, as a collective, lobbies federal and state officials to the tune of $354 million a year. There's money there. That's not money going into research and development. That's money going from Big Pharma into someone's pocket. Okay, how many people can you buy with 354 million people? You could probably buy me. Be honest with you. Bill Gates the Gates Foundation spends $320 million to random media outlet donations. Anybody ever seen that montage where it's CNN commercials or clips where they say, brought to you by, Good Morning America is now brought to you today by Pfizer. It's about a 10-minute video, and there's probably 50 clips, right? There's a lot of money exchanging hands. This is not about altruism necessarily. Not denigrating the whole industry. I'm just saying be aware of what's going on. Here are some very sobering statistics on fines, criminal fines of fraud being paid for by big. I'll give you some of the highlights. In 2009, Pfizer had to pay $2.3 billion at that time, the largest healthcare fraud settlement in history, for misbranding the painkiller Bextra with the intent to defraud or mislead, promoting the drug to treat acute pain at dosages the FDA had previously deemed dangerously high, etc. Pfizer, by the way, wanted just recently, they asked for a 75-year moratorium before unveiling their trial data with the COVID vaccines. Doesn't pass the smell test with me. Why would you need 75 full years before you could tell us how safe your drug is, right? In 2012, GlaxoSmithKline paid a $3 billion fine to resolve civil and criminal liabilities regarding its promotion of drugs and its failure to report safety data. 2013, $2.2 billion by Johnson & Johnson to resolve criminal and civil allegations revolving around a drug for seniors that turned out to be an antipsychotic that was very damaging. Big Pharma has a bottom line. Big Pharma is money-driven. Like, why are all my lefty friends who used to rail against corporations back in the day open-armed and embrace Big Pharma without a single sideways glance and sell? I'm not against Big Pharma. I understand that it's a business. It has a bottom line. There's things that happens when the scientists are one thing, the CEOs and the accountants and the lawyers are another branch of it. It's just humanity. I get it. But that's part of the problem. That's why we have informed consent. That's why we have bodily autonomy, to protect us from the interest, the self-interest of bodies much larger than us, much more powerful. All right. What is the potential? We're almost done here, guys. Hang in there. I'm proud of you. Did you feel like Neo when he's getting that download? Why would the mRNA vaccine be harmful? Basically, the best theory going to date is that it produces trillions of spike proteins with every dose. And we don't know how long they last in the body. And they do cling, and once they get into your blood, they can go to any organ in the body. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It can affect any tissues, okay? So if you had an overload, is it possible that an overload in an antigen could be harmful? Right? The answer to that is obvious. I mean, it's already being reported. The spike protein is one of the more offensive parts of the coronavirus. So yes, it will boost your B-cell immunity, but at the same time, perhaps overload you with the very thing that causes it to be harmful in the first place. Right? Here's an interesting, can you be too boosted? What happens to helper T cells in an HIV infection? HIV is ever present. It's a very, very high saturation virus, which means once you get HIV, if it's untreated, you produce a tremendous amount of your B cells, your T cells, your helper T cells, literally get overloaded and exhausted and suppressed. And that's what destroys your immunity, and you get acquired immunity deficiency syndrome, AIDS. If you have too much of an antigen, as we've seen with HIV, it can have autoimmune function problems. Is it possible, and now they're starting to wonder that with the third and fourth, and in Israel the fifth dose going out, are we creating a HIV-like helper T cell exhaustion syndrome? I don't know. Nobody knows. That's why it usually takes 5 to 10 years for a vaccine to see the market, okay, on average. And even then, it's never mandated. If it's as good as it says it is, people will adopt it. They did with polio, right? Senator Ron Johnson held a hearing a couple months ago, and somebody from the Department of Defense whistleblowed, and they took an oath. They went to a hearing. If they're lying, they can go to jail. Okay, an anonymous source is one thing. Someone who goes to a Senate hearing with their lawyers is a whole different ballgame. And he divulged a whole bunch of data from the military, from the Department of Defense. They have statistics because they mandated the vaccine somewhat early for the military, and up to I think 80% of the military was vaxxed, right? So he showed they kept record of the medical issues with the military, Navy, Air Force, Marines, etc. And here was some of the data. 300% increase cancers were at a 300% increase, and this is a young population, compared to a 5-year average before the vaccination. Neurological issues, 1,000% increase. compared to the 5-year average. And there's a list of also birth defects, infertility, stuff like that, 1 to 200% over average, right? Once that came out in the hearing, by the way, the Department of Defense cleaned their database. They completely shut it off from public access. Doesn't pass the smell test. That's not transparency, right? If I hide something from you, you think that I have something to hide, right? One America is one of the largest life insurance companies in the States, and the Indiana CEO said they're seeing a 40% increase in 2021 in all-cause mortality, just death in general. Now, if you're in the insurance business, you'll know that 10% increase is a once-in-a-century phenomenon. It's a lightning strike. 40% is unheard of. It will bankrupt a large number of insurance holders, right? He's saying, we don't know why, but this is happening. 2021, boom, marker. What about natural immunity? Is there such a thing? Well, we looked at it in the beginning. If you didn't have immunity, the vaccine triggers your immune system. That's the only way it works. So because naturally encountering the virus create immunity. Well, I'd like to ask Anthony Fauci that pre-COVID.
But she's had the flu for 14 days. Should she get a flu shot?
Well, no. If she got the flu for 14 days, she's as protected as anybody can be, because the best vaccination is to get infected yourself.
And
so
she should not get it?
If she really has the flu, she definitely doesn't need a flu vaccine. If she really has the flu,
she should not get it again.
No, she doesn't need it, because it's the most potent vaccination is getting infected yourself.
Okay, that's true of every other disease we've ever had before COVID came along, by the way. Though CDC will say itself on its website, if you've had polio and gotten over it, don't get a polio shot. You'll take a risk with the polio vaccine that you don't need because you're better immunized with polio, live polio, than dead polio. Okay, let's talk to Bill Gates.
Prior to the beginning of this pandemic, where would you assess where we are today in beating COVID-19?
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines. If you do sero surveys in African countries, you get well over 80% of people have been exposed either to the vaccine or to various variants. And so, what that does is it means the chance of severe disease, which is mainly associated with being elderly and having obesity or diabetes, those risks are now dramatically reduced because of that infection exposure. And it's sad we didn't do a great job on therapeutics. Only here 2 years in do we have a good therapeutic. Vaccines, it took us 2 years to be in oversupply. Today, there are more vaccines than there is demand for vaccines.
Okay, so interesting. A few things to take from this. It's sad that Omicron was I guess if you have billions of dollars invested in vaccine, it would be sad. He said something very interesting. 80% of Africa, he says, has antibodies or some sort of serum sign of B or T cell memory. 80% from either the vaccine or the infection. Do you know what the vaccination rate is on average in Africa? 11%. That means 70% of the 70%, the rest of the 70%, 90% of the immunity is from the infection itself. COVID, he said it, COVID mainly affects the obese, the old, and when you're obese, you usually have type 2 diabetes. So diabetes, obesity are the leading comorbidities. That's why the U.S. had such a bad run on average with COVID. They're the fattest country in the world. We did not develop therapeutics in time. I'm going to finish on that because remember, what is medicine really at the end of the day? It is early intervention. Why do you get a mammogram? Why do you get a routine checkup with your doctor? You want to catch that breast cancer when it's like 2 cells big if you can. Have you heard of any WHO, public health office, any sort of health services in the Western world say one thing about what's a good idea to do if you catch COVID early. I haven't. Private clinics have developed protocols, but our official experts have zero to say in early intervention. They know better than that. I don't like that. All right, home stretch there, guys, I promise. CDC is now saying natural immunity provides significantly more protection against COVID than vaccination only. In the States, the statistics do show that if you're previously infected and vaccinated, you do have a slight advantage over the previously infected alone. Might be a blip in the statistics. It's not a huge difference, but you put infection in there, it puts you way above vaccine only, way above. Boom, boom, boom. That's all it says right there. Surviving a previous infection now provided greater protection against subsequent infection than vaccination. The Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, pandemic of the unvaccinated is now Johns Hopkins is very pro-vax. It's not a right-wing think tank. Pandemic of the unvaccinated is a misnomer. It's a pandemic of the non-immune. Israel, which is probably I think they're heading to their 5th shot. They're finding that, prior infection offers considerably better protection than 2 doses. Here is the Canadian, this is from Google, okay? Not from rightwingsrs.conspiracy.com. This is Google statistics. Literally, Google Canada COVID, this is the first thing that comes up. It's a live map of case counts over time. Right here, as you can see, this is a 10,000 marker right across here. We're getting about 6,000 new cases a day. We're 38 million people in Canada, okay? This is Uttar Pradesh in India, population 204 million, so 5 times our population. Their latest case count this week, we're getting dozens a day, not thousands a day. Why is that, right? Very bad health system, very high density overcrowding, less obesity, more heat. But just think about that. Here is Nigeria. April 6th, they were doing zero. They're flatlining. How many people in Nigeria? 90 million people. Basically 3 times our population. And how about the Democratic... Do you know what by the way, sorry, I forgot some statistics here. At the time of the original flatlining in Uttar Pradesh, they had 20% vaccination status. Okay? Nigeria's had 256,000 cases since this started. Canada's had 3.5 million cases since this started. They've had 3,100 deaths. We had 38,000 deaths. Okay, they have 5 times our population. Sorry, Nigeria has 3 times our population, but 10 times less death. That's a factor of 30 difference. And they are less than 10% vaxxed in Nigeria. Congo, less than 1% vaxxed. The Congo, less than 1% vaccinated. They've had 87,000 cases. The Congo is Nigeria is 201 million people. The Congo is 90 million people. And this is the Congo. They're at 33 cases a day, and they are at literally less than 1% vaccination rate. So the vaccine's not driving those numbers. Now, I get it. They have a different healthcare system. They don't necessarily have as acute of a reporting system. There's factors to factor in, but let's think about that's a huge differential. This is all off Google, which is based off the WHO's data and the Worldometer and World in Numbers. Okay, what would be, this is the next slide is my last slide, believe it or not. What could work as early prevention in COVID? Do we have any clue? And because this is what the key is to these numbers I just showed you. Uttar Pradesh, they're the only state in India that had a protocol, early intervention protocol for COVID. What did they do if you tested positive for COVID in Uttar Pradesh? Sent you home with ivermectin. Every single last positive case. Ivermectin's been around since the 70s, okay? It's been used since 87. Its safety rating is close to that of baby aspirin, okay? It's not owned by anyone, it's generic, so it can be produced for literally the cost of basically, I think, vitamin D, right? It's extremely, extremely easy to produce and cheap. So they flatlined the curve around the time they started implementing that protocol. Now, this is how the virus replicates, remember? Spike protein triggers the opening of the cell, pukes out its RNA, and the RNA starts being turned into protein by your ribosomes. On the ribosome is a clump of molecules called the RNA polymerase. Without that activator, it will not translate properly. Zinc binds itself to the RNA polymerase, fudging its ability to function, which stops the ribosomal activity from functioning, which stops the photocopying of the virus, okay? And its construction into a full virus. Ivermectin does the same thing. Now, why is zinc important? What does hydroxychloroquine do? It opens up the pores in your cell to allow a huge amount of zinc to enter your cell, much higher than would naturally be possible. So you load your body with zinc and HCQ, you'll have intracellular zinc concentrations that are through the roof. And I stopped putting papers on this slide as I was getting tired. I could produce a whole number of NIH-sponsored research into proving exactly that. That's how it stops parasites. Congo and Nigeria have something like 38% of the world's malaria cases every year. They make HCQ as cheap as vitamin C over there. Everyone's taking it every day like we take vitamins, okay? Because it stops. What else uses this RNA polymerase ribosome photocopy machine? Parasites. What's malaria? It's a parasite. So what would work for a parasite would work for an RNA virus, right? So, by the way, you've heard the term that it's ivermectin's horse paste, right? Who won a Nobel Prize for medicine in 2015? Campbell and his team for what? Ivermectin's ability to stop the replication of parasites intracellularly, right? They proved the mechanism of why. So this is 2000, and again, this has always been used on humans. Every drug you know that works on a mammal of Homo sapien variety, does it work on other mammals as well? Do they give cows antibiotics? Do they give cows anti-inflammatories? So next time your buddy gets a pneumonia or staph infection, takes antibiotics, tell him he's taking a cow cleanser, right? If we can call ivermectin horse dewormer, we can call antibiotics cow cleansers. And the NIH right here even said, we're using old weapons for a new enemy. What they're talking about in this article, HCQ and ivermectin's ability to stop COVID. And by the way, this is known. If we now all know it after an hour class, do you know who else knows it or should know it? The FDA. And yet an FDA official says, you're not a horse, stop taking dewormer. This is in last year. That's embarrassing. That goes to show you, when you're talking about, do you know what there was no R&D cost to any of the companies that made these mRNA vaccines. The government paid for everything. Usually you go into $500 million worth of debt for R&D. Nothing. Pure profit. And if they can mandate 3 to 4 shots a year for everyone for life, do you know what that does to their profit margin? These are companies that have been sued criminally for billions of dollars already, okay? It's not Mother Teresa. So we're dealing with they're averaging, there's a surprisingly few amount of dollars to be made worldwide by big pharma in vaccines, because you get it once as you're a kid and you're done. They went from about an average, I think, of $3 billion of profits a year to something like $60 billion as an industry. That's statistic. There's a money incentive, let's be honest. All right, well that's, in 2 weeks we're back here, by the way. We're going to talk about the Great Reset. What is it? What's happening, etc. And right now we're going to close the show and open it up to questions and answers. So I'm going to have Vanna White come down and work the microphone. Oh, okay. So does anybody have any questions? I don't know if I would say that COVID, you can give him the mic if you want.
I've been following, I've followed the grand jury trial all 6 days, all the information there. There's 40 hours of it, and it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. David Martin, in October this year in the Common Ground, who has been following this since 1986, has documented that this spike protein and the COVID has been designed in bioweapons lab facility, that the RNA is not even from an organic anything, it's designed by a computer. So that's taking this whole thing to a whole other level. This is not a vaccine. Never was. It's a medical experiment, and it's for eugenic purposes.
Well, we'll find out. I know that a group of geneticists had said that when you profile the RNA in COVID-19, there's a streak of DNA on there that is exactly matches a Moderna patent on chemicals. That doesn't mean that it was put into there necessarily. It's a curious phenomenon, and their conclusion was that this was not a naturally evolving. Now this could mean though that it was made in a research scenario. Like, we know they're doing gain of function in Wuhan. They're not supposed to, but they've been caught before. China got caught making monkey-human hybrid and putting them in pregnant women, right? So will they play with gain of function even though it's illegal? I think so. And time will tell just how deep the rabbit hole goes. But I'm trying to keep tonight's presentation on the undeniables.
I get that.
Yeah.
I think you spelled COVID wrong. Isn't it convid?
Sure.
So I wrote my MLA about why is the government not promoting ivermectin, and I sent them links to studies showing that it's not dangerous at all, it's totally safe, and all these studies show it's good. And I got an email back saying, oh, listen, you have to, we're just following what Health Canada is guiding us. Here's the email for Health Canada. So I wrote Health Canada an email, and I said the same thing. Why is this happening? And they say, oh, because it's not approved as a medication for COVID-19. And that's why but they said, oh, but your doctor, your general practitioner they can prescribe that for you if they would like to. It'll be off-label, but that's fine. And now this was earlier on. Now they're not allowed to do that, but this was earlier on. So then I wrote them back again, and I gave them more data showing how it was saving lives in Mexico City. And I said, this would save lives in Canada by not doing this. You are allowing people to die. And they came back and they said, well, we cannot recommend it for COVID-19 because no pharmaceutical company has provided us evidence, has like presented it to the government as that treatment, and they need to provide that with data that proves that it helps it.
Yep.
So they're not gonna do anything unless a pharmaceutical company presents it as such. Like, it's ridiculous.
No, I agree. And they've outlawed, in BC and Alberta at least, both ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine for COVID, right? Like, outlawed it. So now they won't even let your physician make that call. And off-label usage of medication is literally almost 100%. Every single drug you see, physicians are given the ladderability of off-label usage because they all know that it's just a red tape issue that something is labeled just for that. It's followed all the procedures, the safety testing, I get it. Off-label usage is done with every single medication you know of for obvious reasons, like we just saw. If the RNA polymerase is a photocopy unit for both parasites and RNA viruses, duh, right? And the real-life laboratory of Earth during the pandemic is showing us there is something to investigate there, but no one's interested in investigating it. Well, she should be.
She's pushing this agenda.
Yeah.
It's very upsetting and disturbing, and I know that is a question, but I find it very upsetting and disturbing that the facts that all seem pretty obvious and clear, and yet this is just all still being pushed on us.
Mm-hmm.
The government employee being told what to say.
Like, when's the last time Bonnie Henry put out a 3-hour podcast detailing the pathophysiology of COVID, the way the vaccine works? Not once. She'll give you 2-second sound bites like, pediatric vaccines are safe and effective for children, right? Well, that's not much data. That's not much data. But I can listen to doctors in private practice all over the world. I can find hours of their discussing, and it's always nuanced. I'm not against this vaccine. Matter of fact, RNA technology could be a fantastic step forward in medicine. It probably is, right? I'm just against mandatory, when corporations line the pockets of politicians to profit off of us, which has happened throughout that's why our country was designed to take that power away from people. Because people have been hitting each other over the head with that hammer for millennia. We said, we're going to start a new society where no one has that power. The Nuremberg Code was built by the West, and we used it to put doctors to death. Firing squad, boom, bang, because they violated the Nuremberg Code. We use the spirit of the Nuremberg Code to create informed consent laws, which say you must be informed before you can even consent. And even when you've been informed, you can choose to consent or not. Now, if I withhold information from you in a consent form, even if you sign it, it's not valid. So it has to be properly informed. I have to prove in a court of law that I've properly informed you. And then you have the choice to consent or not. What's happening now is the government's saying, I'm not giving you an information, and I'm not asking for your consent. Stick your arm out, let's go. That's wrong. That's what I'm against. I'm not against that. I would be much more likely, none of it's passed the smell test to me from the beginning, which is why I'm like, you know what? No thanks. And I had 2 bouts of COVID. I'm fine, right?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to add the gentleman up front talking about, yeah, the gentleman up front that mentioned the grand jury with Reiner Fulmick. And that really is absolutely worth listening to because it's a big picture. And the doctors and the lawyers and the people all involved, their lives actually are under threat. They have everything to lose. People like Dr. Michael Yeadon, Paul Alexander, just the reams of like top, most brilliant and the best and the most courageous. And those are the ones you have to listen to. And it's not, and as far as like China making hybrids, when you listen to Reiner Fulmick, when you get the big picture, it isn't China, it's DARPA, and it's America.
Oh, it's
Peter
a
does
worldwide
it.
conglomerate.
And it is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. It may sound crazy to normal people, but this COVID thing, and even as far as cases, like my husband said, you know, the PCR test isn't even a real thing. And how do you determine what Omicron and Delta is? I mean, really, when you think about it, the whole thing. And as far as the deaths in America, most of the deaths in America were caused because they went into the hospital, they were given remdesivir, their kidneys shut down, they destroyed their bodies, and then they made money on ventilators. So the whole thing is a total scam. It's a crime. It is crime against humanity. It's a crime against humanity.
Thank you.
The answer to the question as to why they won't allow hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin is because if they were allowed to be used, they wouldn't be able to give the vaccine because it was only rolled out under emergency use only. And if there was a cure, they wouldn't be allowed to use
100%.
it.
One of the languages, one of the stipulations in emergency use authorizations is there cannot be an alternative therapy.
That's right. And there is nothing on the insert of the vaccine. They can change the ingredients on a whim. So no one even knows what they put into their bodies. It's just, when it all hits the fan, it's going to be a mess.
And understand too that it's all the vaccines that are currently manufactured and stored, ready to be used, are 100% based off the original Alpha Wuhan strain, right? It's not updated, right? Like the flu shot you get every year, it's from they usually use Australia's strains because they're winters before ours in the southern hemisphere. And then we base it off of that to guesstimate what's coming through down the pipes. Because all previous influenzas, if you've gotten them, you're immune to them. So the new waves, because it's a highly, both influenza and COVID go into and out of animals too, like household pets, livestock. That's a whole breeding area of mutations. That's why it escapes lifelong immunity, right?
Well, as far as the flu shot's concerned, they've never gotten it right. And I used to work in care homes, and they'd go through in October, November, give everybody the flu shot. Before you know it, everybody's got the flu, they got the place shut down. It's never worked. So,
at least they're trying with the flu shot, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that when the vaccines were first introduced, as I recall, we were told, you know, you get 2 shots and you're done sort of thing. And we even had people like Fauci and the head of the CDC saying, you know, if you have the shots, you're not going to get COVID. Well, we found out that wasn't right.
Mm-hmm.
But now, like, we're at the point where they're talking about the 4th and 5th boosters.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were just talking with the flu shot, if they're still using the original vaccines, aren't they like actually less than worthless for
Well,
these?
that's why the Omicron outcomes, as Omicron becomes the dominant wave strain, the outcome for hospitalizations and death, as we saw in the chart, between vaxxed and unvaxxed are getting closer to the same. With every generation of variant, you're getting further away from the original variant, which, yes, of course, it will mean the old vaccine is less and less effective. Would you take a 6-year-old flu shot? Would you expect to be helped by this year's flu from a 3 to 4-year-old flu shot, right? No, no one would do it. But they're doing it with COVID.
I just wanted to know if you can give a suggestion what to say to people who are totally on, you know, buying into the narrative. If you know, to say something. If you
I mean,
only have a short
if
period of
I'd
time.
invite them to a 1-hour lecture. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's 30% of the people that are not interested in changing their minds. There's the 30% of us weirdos that were never fooled in the first place. But there's that 30% middle ground that is starting to go. I know a lot of people in my circles are just like, they'll tell me, I got it just to get them off my back so I can go to work and travel. I never was afraid of COVID, right? Now they're saying, I'm not taking 3, 4, 5, right? And I personally, this is just purely anecdotal, I know more people in my circles that have had a vaccine injury than COVID complications. I mean, I've known someone who almost died, which spooked me because he was basically like me, my age, my health status. And I'm like, wow, it does come out of nowhere. It's not the flu. It is quite worse than the flu for some. And if you go statistically modeling what age groups are at risk, gives you the landscape, but it can still reach out and snag someone it shouldn't, right? It is a fact that you can get killed from COVID when you shouldn't. But I've had it twice. Why would I now take the risk of the vaccine, which is from an older model of the virus that I've already gotten a fresh dose of a couple months ago? That makes no sense to me.
So today I was talking to a woman who said that she knew 3 people in their 40s who had passed away. And one, I said, were they vaxxed? And she said, no. It was somebody who was in their 40s, just like they had COVID, and then that week they up and died, and I'm like, wow, that's
Yep, it does
no
happen.
comorbidities. So, yeah.
I had one. I read some stats that I think the COVID-19 vaccine, its efficacy, even their stats after like 3 or 4 months, it's almost down to 0, isn't it? It's like 8% or something they say.
Yeah, I don't know the exact number.
I think they put it out. Do you know? Or?
I think after 3 months, it dropped to, I think it was 70% efficacy, 3 months. But then after 6 months, it was, I think it was like 40%. At 8 months, it was like absolutely, it didn't do anything at all. It was, I think that's what it was.
Yeah. Okay.
So another group meeting here wants to know of adverse reactions and wants to create testimonials. It's called We Unify.
Okay.
And you would be a great contact for them.
Yeah, I've already gotten in contact with them.
Excellent.
Through Dan, yes. And remember this too, like there's 30,000 letters in the RNA strain of COVID. Every time it enters a person, on average, that person will make 4 mutations in it. Because think of RNA replication or DNA replication like a Scrabble factory, where you get a Scrabble word on a thing and you've got to recreate it letter by letter. Well, mistakes get made. A letter gets switched out, a letter gets missed out, whatever, right? That happens constantly in gene mutation, in gene replication. So if every one of us who's had COVID, there's now an Emmanuel strain out there. Now that doesn't mean it's going to, like, those 4 mutations can be in a really like silent dark part of the RNA that makes no difference. But over time, if every person who gets it is mutating it, it's like twisting the Rubik's Cube 1 notch. Eventually, down the line, it begins to look very, very different than the original one. And like I said, when the surface proteins that when I showed you the actual map of COVID, there's more than the spike protein that can act as an antigen, right? There's 4 basic proteins on the surface. When you get the actual infection, your immune profile theoretically is looking at all the surface proteins, which is most likely why live infection is better than just having a spike protein antibody from the vaccine.
I was wondering if I could get your thoughts as someone who is a healthcare professional who touches bodies as a massage therapist and a physiotherapist. What are your thoughts about shedding? And
you know, as a chiropractor, I've had that thought as well. Dr. Malone was asked that on a podcast recently, and basically he says we don't know. You know, like one theory was that within 2 weeks of inoculation, of getting the vaccine, you're shedding it through your breathing and through your sweating. That was a theory. Malone basically said, there's not enough data at this point. It certainly is not as bad as getting the vaccine in terms of being afraid of being exposed to the spike proteins, right? But yeah, it's been a concern of mine as well, but you know, not enough data as far as I can tell. A+ to all you guys for sticking out this long on a Saturday night science lecture. You guys have no lives or what?
Here's an interesting thing. The immigrants to the southern border in the U.S. are given they're all given ivermectin for parasites when they first come in.
Interesting. Huh. That'd be nice. So if you're having a hard time getting getting your hands on ivermectin, you know what to do. Go to Mexico and then go to the U.S.
I just wondered, I know a bunch of people that couldn't make it tonight and I just wondered, is your information, like this, a lot to kind of take in?
Yes, it's all being filmed and it'll be put on the website.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, the YouTube channel has a weird, like 40 digits. It doesn't have its own name.
Okay.
But if you go to YouTube and look up Christians Podcasting, Christian plural podcasting, that channel will come up. Matter of fact, let me just do it live right here so you guys know what the logo looks like. This is my daughter's computer, so that's what the that's not my background paper of choice. Just so you know, I'm not into Hello Kitty anymore. Well, I had to be when you have daughters. Okay, so Christians Podcasting, and it should bring up, there's my logo a little bit below. Yeah, there it is. This is what it looks like, Christians Podcasting, and it has the previous lecture on there too, and it'll have this lecture on there. And look, we're live streaming right now. So. Oh gosh darn it. I think I know how to do this. I don't need Justin. I can do this all by myself. There was a gentleman, Bruce, who had a question back there in the blue shirt. Okay, but he's next because he's been very patient. Sorry, let me just try and get this up on. Can you see it now? Perfect, okay. So here is the logo. It looks like this. Well, this is, oh geez, what did I do? You see the logo right there, what Christians believe? That's what it looks like, and this is what the YouTube channel looks like. You just go to YouTube itself, and in the search bar, put in Christians Podcasting, and you'll get all this stuff. Yes.
How do they identify different strains of COVID? Like, how does somebody know if they have Omicron or Delta or whatever?
You wouldn't know unless you went to a specialty testing lab, which is not like a life lab or the ER. They will assume based on, some labs do know that, but that's like the NIH research centers. They're trying to see what's this strain that's dominant. They'll take samples from tests. But as far as I know, you cannot tell. They don't have a specified test. You'll get the PCR test or the rapid antigen test or the rapid antibody test, which is non-specified as far as I know. I could be wrong about that, but they only know this at a higher level, not on a boots on the ground level. So they do make a guesstimate based on, they can do a pretty decent estimate based on your symptom presentation compared to known Omicron infections versus Delta. It does begin to have a trend, but chemically, a specific chemical, no.
I'm just wondering if you have feedback with regards to vaccines that are been approved by Health Canada, Novavax, Medicago.
If I have what, sorry?
Any feedback around these?
Oh, the ones that are the attenuated version of the virus? I like it, right? I like the idea of it because then it's just like getting COVID, right? It doesn't have any of the question marks of supersaturating your body with spike proteins.
The PCR test, how do you feel about the efficiency of it?
Well, if you cycle it too much, you'll find anything in your spaghetti, right? The inventor of the PCR test itself, he said it's a non-specific test. So there's some guesswork when someone gets a positive PCR test. If they didn't overcycle it, if they cycle it, I think under 28 cycles, it is fairly accurate for a type of RNA strain. Is it COVID or something else? It's non-specific beyond that point, right? So I don't know what to make of a PCR test. Now, if you have a PCR test, a positive rapid antigen test, and a positive antibody test, and all the symptoms that are very similar to the current wave, you're pretty sure to have it, right?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Good, thanks,
The free tests, what do you know about the free tests?
Not much. I think my wife works as a farm tech. She brought a bunch home the other day. I haven't even looked at them. I think wouldn't they be a rapid antigen test though? Yeah, okay. They're fairly accurate. I mean, it's not as good as a blood serology, which you cannot get in Canada, by the way, anywhere in Canada. They're doing it in the UK. They're doing it in the States, where you look for specific T cell, B cell markers for the antigen. That's much more accurate and much more telling of whether or not you have long-lasting immunity. Because like I said, your bloodstream antibodies will die off within 6 to 9 weeks, right, after infection. Even if once you've overcome it, the body just goes, okay, we don't need to produce these anymore. We've killed it off. Of course it's going to die down, but those memory cells are there. They can last decades in both the B and T cell memories, right?
So it wouldn't be beneficial to get an antibody test to just know whether you've got
It might be a false negative, right? You might get a negative on it because you've been more than 6 weeks post-infection.
Okay. Yeah, so
and
it's not
then
really
you spent money for nothing.
Yeah, no, it's not.
You go to Seattle on the Clipper and get a blood work done, proper blood work, then you would know, right?
How can you get across on the Clipper?
Yeah, exactly. You can't.
That's the hard part.
That's right. Yes.
I find it so frustrating that if what happened in Uttar Pradesh, if it was the vaccines, like if you looked at that graph and said, hey, listen, look at how great the vaccine is. Look at Delta variant. They had this big spike and they went across the country and they vaccinated everyone and dropped it to nothing. Isn't that amazing? You know, that's what the vaccination should have done. They've not done that. There's no place in the world that show that.
Worked
but
for polio.
ivermectin has done it.
Worked for polio, right? Like you saw the graph with polio. When vaccines work, they work.
The president of Tanzania sent tests. They took swabs from a goat, a quail, engine oil,
and
I don't know what a
cantaloupe,
pawpaw is. What's that?
Cantaloupe too, I think you took cantaloupe
Yeah,
swab.
maybe, and they all came back positive, so they said, forget it, we're not doing this in our country.
So I'm a court reporter, and I
Okay.
see a lot of lawyers, and I do a
Yes.
lot of charter challenges and all kinds of things. I had a lawyer the other day who is a conservative candidate in the last running. I won't say his name. If anyone wants to ask me, I'll tell you later, just in case I'm recorded. I talked to him about the vaccine a little bit. He was not going to get it, but as a Conservative Party member, he decided he saw the lay of the land in the political landscape. He ended up with myocarditis. His wife is a cardiac surgeon. It's been very concerning for him, and he actually congratulated me on joining society yesterday.
Mm.
Just a comment.
Yeah, no.
And I do have one question. What do you think about the lipid nanoparticles? Do you think there's more to it than just, a little bit of fat? Because I've read a lot over the last 20 years
Yeah.
about nanotechnology
Yeah.
and the way it moves and what their goals are for it. And there's a lot of high-minded things that it can do, but I also feel that there's a lot of low-minded things that it can do, especially when we come to pharmaceuticals.
Yep. I mean, you can use nuclear energy to power a nation or to destroy a nation, right? Everything that's especially cutting edge tech, like CRISPR technology, where we can edit genes, that could be used for tremendous good or evil, right? And I don't know enough about the lipid nanoparticles, and I don't think we do in general, right? I wish that there was more transparency in the sense that, can you imagine the kind of sample data we've now created with 5 billion people being vaccinated with that stuff, right? And I mean, if they eliminate, it's good that there's at least 10% of us, 20% of us-ish in Western countries that are not vaxxed, because we're the control group, which I have a suspicion they'd like to erase that control group, because then we don't know what is causing what. So yeah, I have no answer on the LNPs. I have no idea, sorry. This is my hobby, I don't have... Yes.
First of all, I came in late, so I've only caught the last hour. But what would you identify, based upon the information that you have, other than the profitability of big pharma and government, what may potentially else be behind that? And I know you're talking about this in 2 weeks, but the connection to the Great Reset and also what's going on with COVID-19.
Yes, I think that, again, I'm going to put this back up because you basically, I will be discussing that kind of tie-in in 2 weeks. And again, the Great Reset, it is not a conspiracy. It's what it's called by the people talking about it. Klaus Schwab wrote a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. He's tying it in, right? So all I talk about when I do these lectures is undeniable facts, right? Everything, I have opinions that go further down the rabbit hole than I would say, but I'm trying to make it, what I say, I'm trying to make it unbreakable in a logical sense, right? So we're going to look at what are the goals they have said they have, right? And are they acting as though they mean it? And what would those goals potentially mean for people like me and you? And is COVID a useful tool? Well, they think that it is, because he wrote a book called COVID-19 and the Great Reset. He's weaponizing it to advance what he thinks is a utopia. He thinks it's a great possible event. To build back better, right? That was a phrase that's been used by every major world leader now. Build back better, build back better. Great Reset, build back better, right? There is a unified ideology for sure. What is that ideology? What can we know for sure about it? And absolutely COVID is a being weaponized to usher us into a future in which we have nothing in common with how we grew up in terms of bodily autonomy, undeniable charter rights, and these things. There's something going on for sure, because these people are not dumb.
I think it's beneficial for us, just to first of all make a comment. The word conspiracy actually infers secret. So the World Economic Forum, their website, there's nothing secret. If you take the time to listen to what was just done at the World Government Summit, they're clearly articulating their plan. So it's got nothing to do with secrecy, really. They're clearly communicating this is what we're here for, this is what our agenda is, but they're absolutely convinced that what they're doing, or at least the majority, I think there might be a few nefarious individuals, but the majority are believing that their plan is the best thing for planet Earth.
Yes.
And the majority are convinced of this, but it's worthwhile to watch the World Government Summit that just took place in Dubai. It's worthwhile to go to the Great Reset, their website, and hear directly from them, so you're getting the information. And as you line that up to your biblical worldview, you're going to go, this is so far off from what the kingdom agenda is.
Yeah, and I mean, like you said, good intentions, right? What's the saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. In the first series, we looked at Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao thought, hey, look at China. We're 80 years behind the West in industrialization. We're gonna do this great leap forward, and it's gonna take us 5 years to do what the West did in 100 years. And so they socially engineered things for a good goal, and they ended up with the Great Famine, the largest ever recorded famine and deadliest famine in human history. So just because they have intentions that in their heart is good, they're not God. They cannot social engineer civilizations, but they think that they can, right? Bill Gates, he was involved in a project where they wanted to aerosol spray large portions to create sort of artificial sunblock. You guys remember that? And the agricultural lobby in the US says, wait a second, no. Like, A, we won't produce enough food, and B, who else knows what frickin' consequences that's gonna have? Like, these guys are too much power. That's why the West was built to depower, to decentralize power. And now we're seeing the power conglomerate again. And even with good intentions of the most intelligent among us, they cannot play God. Because when they do, we die.
I just want to make one comment about Edward Dowd. I don't know if you've heard of him or not, but he's been releasing the all-cause mortality.
Okay.
He's a former BlackRock hedge fund manager.
Oh, I heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, he's really interesting, but he was saying that right now people are dropping Pfizer's stock, and that it's the insurance companies are the bag holders. On Friday, I saw out of Germany that a German court ruled that the insurance company didn't have to pay for a man's mortality that was linked directly to COVID because it was not mandated, therefore it was his choice, and it was suicide.
Yep.
That's a court ruling out of Germany right now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And there was a similar ruling, I think, in the US where they said, like, life insurance policies are denying claims based on COVID deaths. They're like, this was an experimental vaccine, it wasn't even approved, we're not liable. You did it by choice, right? Because Biden never even said an executive order for that. He just said it's mandated. Corporations followed suit expecting an executive order to come down the pipes, which never came. And that leaves everybody off the hook. The corporations, the insurance companies, the only people paying the price are the vaccine injured.
Any last questions?
Let's go home. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, one more.
One more?
No, why not? I'm okay with it. If you're a crazy pagan, you don't have to pray, but us Christians are about to pray. Dear Lord, we just pray that you would bless every single last person here, Lord, that you're the truth, the way, and the life, and your people are a people of truth. We just want to know the truth, Lord. We do not want to be fooled. We do not want to fall into groupthink. We want to know what is happening so that we can shed light to our friends and family, co-workers, and loved ones. Just pray that you would, again, bless and protect every single last person in here and make us beacons of light to possibly, if it's your will, turn the tide in what's going on. We thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thank you all.